Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to the ithurtstomom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and I hope everyone has had a wonderful holiday season. My guest today is Dr. Davis McAlister. He's a chiropractor, a coach, a speaker, and the author of the book, Pillars of Powerful Parenting. So, Doctor, tell us a little bit about yourself first.
So usually when, I start off, I kind of go back so that people kind of have a whole picture of who I am and where I come from. We're kind of shaped by our experiences. And, I grew up in small town, Mississippi. Was a latchkey kid growing up. It was a term that was used to describe us because our parents would work long hours and work hand to cane. So we were kind of thrust in that position to be, self-sufficient and resilient and all those things growing up. But at the same time, that tended to affect, relationships with parents and between parents and children and things like that, which was my case. I grew up, I had a pretty good relationship with my mom, but not so much my dad. My dad, kind of grew up in a tumultuous household as well. So, and he kind of repeated a lot of those, same things that, he grew up with. And so, and it kind of came to a head when I was a teenager to the extent where, I was kicked out of the house and kind of left on my own to figure it out. Ended up on the streets for a couple months and ended up joining the military, and that was my escape. Ended up spending 8 years in the military. My primary job, I worked in military intelligence. I was a human intelligence specialist for military intelligence. Wow. And had to learn different languages and things like that. So I got to travel a lot and had a lot of great experiences of that. But the biggest thing is that, I had to grow up. And when you're put in that kind of situation, people that go in the military tend to mature a lot faster anyway, because you see and have to experience a lot of things that most people that age don't experience. And, but between being, homeless and then going straight into that, it required you to grow up real quick. But out of that, I kind of went on a journey of kind of self-discovery as far as who I was and what my abilities were, and developing my own self-confidence and getting my feet grounded and becoming more purpose-driven, self-disciplined, all those things. Then decided to get out and go back to school. It was one of those things I didn't know exactly what I wanted to major in when I first got out. I just knew that I needed to go to school. At the time, they were shutting a lot of, this was just before 9/11. They were shutting a lot of the units down and cutting back on military resources. And so my unit was one of the ones that was affected by it. Our unit was shut down, and we were kind of given a decision. Okay, you can reclassify or and be able to stay in, but you won't be able to keep your current job, or your other option is to go ahead and transition out. So I went ahead and decided to transition out and go to school. So went to school at Mississippi State. I grew up watching Mississippi State football and all those things, and knew that I wanted to go to school there. I started off, I had to declare a major, and I didn't know what to major in. I really didn't know what direction I wanted to go. I just knew I needed to do something. And so my initial major was international business. I figured I would take the, military intelligence background that I had. I had, a language background, and would try to do something with that. And started getting into it. And in all honesty, really hated the business classes. They were, the political science classes, all those things that I had to take as part of that major. I hated all of them. It just didn't click with me as well, and wasn't just a natural fit for me. And while I was going to school, though, I went and visited an uncle down in San Antonio, and he took me to a chiropractor. My body was pretty beat up. While I was at Mississippi State, I walked on. I was a high-level competitive power lifter my last couple of years in service, and then into my undergrad, and walked on at my lab partner in organic chemistry was the starting tight end, and he and I went and worked out some, and he was like, "You need to come play football," and I'm like, "I'm too old to play football."
Right.
And I really thought that there was an age limit on who could play and all those things. And so ended up, he set it up and said, we've got a walk-on tryout coming up. You guys can come out and see if they'll keep you. And I ended up being one of two guys that they kept through the tryout. So and very quickly earned the nickname Grandpa, because I was the oldest guy on the team. The average age of the players was about 19, 20 years old. And I was 25 going on 26 at the time.
So old.
Yeah. And but I got out there, and for me it was more of I had no aspirations that I was ever going to get on the field. I didn't have the level of experience that everybody else did, but I mean, I always had athletic ability. I was an athlete all the way through high school, and then being in the military and the nature of the job that I had to be an athlete there. Just a different type. For me, it was more about, in all honesty, therapy. Transitioning out of the military and getting put on a college campus. I mean, I left the military installation and was on a college campus 10 days later. And being, there was just such a stark contrast. I found myself very, very frustrated because I was seeing people that, all these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids that took everything that they had for granted. A lot of them just wasting their time there, and I had a lot of frustration with that, especially with everything that I had gone through. And so being able to play some football and go out there and knock heads with a few folks and not get in trouble for it, that was
felt good.
It felt good. It was very therapeutic. So but I ended up actually getting to work my way out there and earned a bowl ring while I was there. And ended up getting a Peach Bowl ring. We played Clemson my last year there. So, and then, but with all that, my body was getting beat up. So I went and visited my uncle in San Antonio, and he took me to a chiropractor. I'm like, oh, what? What is that? Had never even heard of that. So he took me to his chiropractor, and after that first visit, I mean, that was the best I had felt in years. Going and getting realigned and had some muscle work done and just trying to get me balanced out. And I was like, you know what? This is something I think I could do. I can get my doctorate degree. I'm not confined to a desk. I can get up and move around and be active, and but I don't have to necessarily be outside if I don't want to. So I changed my major to pre-med, and to get up my prerequisites to go to chiropractic school done. And a lot of people don't even know that, our prerequisites to get into chiropractic school are the exact same that you have to have for medical school, minus the MCAT. Got all my stuff done, finished my first bachelor's degree in 2.5 years. I just plowed straight through, worked through the summers and got it done. And then moved to Dallas and started school at Parker College. At the time it was Parker College of Chiropractic. Now it's Parker University. That expanded out a lot. And so I went through that. Met my wife while I was in school, and she had 2 boys from a previous marriage. And we do not use the term step in our house. And I know that and probably with your audience, there's some blended families and those things, but we don't use the term step in our house. It was already an agreement that, when she and I got, even started dating, and then got married, that, it was unconditional where those kids were concerned, and they were not going to be treated any different than other kids. And so, which ended up, during that course of time, I tried to work on mending the fences where my family was concerned, and had developed a speaking relationship with my parents and stuff again. And then when my wife got pregnant on our honeymoon, we had twins, boy-girl twins, and it became evident very, very quickly that my parents wanted to treat the biological kids differently than the non-biological kids. And so that ended up coming to a head, and we ended up having to just break ties with that relationship. And it was their choice to break the ties. It wasn't necessarily ours. It was, okay, look, we're not going to treat the kids differently. Those boys already had a hard enough time. Their dad was somewhat in the picture when she and I met, but after I came in the picture, he very quickly disappeared and was very absent. And it's one of those things. Sometimes in those situations, it's a blessing in disguise, and he had some habits and some things that were not productive, where the kids was concerned. And so for their sake, it was better that he wasn't involved. To them, I've always been dad. When we met, the oldest was 7, the second one was 4. And then the twins came along, and then we ended up with another blessing we didn't know we wanted a few years later after that. We thought we were done, because when, my wife and I met, she was like, I'll agree to one more child. So, so we ended up having twins. And then,
right.
and then
surprise.
Yeah, another surprise. And then, so and during all the course of this, so when she had the twins, I graduated from my doctorate program at 3:00 on a Saturday afternoon, and she was still pregnant. At that point, she was 40 weeks and 1 day. And she went into, so I graduated at 3:00 on a Saturday afternoon. She went into labor at 8:00 the next morning. And and with our twins. And so from start to finish, from the time she started labor to the time they were here, it was 4 hours and 20 minutes. It went very, very quickly. And then we found ourselves in a situation we didn't know exactly what direction we wanted to go. When you come out of chiropractic school, it's not like a lot of the medical schools where you have your hospital set up, especially then. It's getting a lot better now as far as the current generation of doctors that are coming out. But back then, your choices were, you did something else until you could get a practice going. There were rare instances that you could go work for another doc if you wanted to, but those were kind of few and far between. And the majority of people, you just had to go into practice for yourself. And so, I had some job offers overseas. I did have one offer down in San Antonio that, before things we ended up kind of breaking ties with my parents. We had said, hey, I have a potential offer to get started down in San Antonio. Would you guys help us out? At least let us have a place to stay until we can get on our feet. And they said, absolutely not. So, so we ended up losing that opportunity. Moving in with her parents that in a 1,000 square foot mobile home outside Louisville, Texas. As a matter of fact, it's that area right in between Louisville and the Colony.
That's where I live.
Yeah, and so we ended up moving in with them, and I remember driving around in downtown Louisville, just driving down Main Street, and I'm just praying. I'm like, God, I don't know what you want me to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The doors keep closing, and I tell people this, and don't really care if anybody believes me or not, but I literally heard a voice say, "Turn in here," and so I turned into the first parking lot, and so I turned in and pulled up, and I recognized the building. It had belonged to an orthodontist at the time. Matter of fact, it was my wife's orthodontist. It was her orthodontist, and what I didn't know before I walked in there is that she had sold that building. She had, we knew that she had moved, but we didn't know that she had sold the building. And so when I went in and started inquiring, about what was all in the building, I found out that 2 chiropractors had just bought the building about 2 months prior, and had started a personal injury practice in there, and they had a completely empty upstairs. And so they offered me a room up there to get started for $200 a month, and share some of the expenses as far as X-rays and things like that. And that's how we got started, and it kind of took off from there. Well, after a couple of years, by my second year in practice, we opened up a second location over in Frisco, over on Main Street, and just kind of integrated in with another doc. Me and another doc started sharing a space over there. So I was over there part-time, and then part-time in Louisville. And then my wife started developing some health issues after our twins were born. And it started becoming a serious problem where I was going to have to start being able to be able to help out more at home. And so I had needed to cut back on the number of hours I was working, because, trying to get a new practice and start, your own business and all these things, trying to get all this stuff off the ground, it requires an extreme amount of time. And what I didn't understand is how much time I was actually giving up. And so when I found myself, trying to cut back, but I found myself at home for a short period of time with my children, full time. I was doing part-time practice and had a couple of docs that were helping manage the main practices. And then, when I was at home with my kids full time, that was a stark slap of reality that I didn't know who my kids were.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know anything about them. And so, I didn't know what they like to eat. I didn't know what their, the little tendencies were, the differences between their personalities. With 5 different kids, I had 5 different personalities, and I didn't know their differences. And so, because I was spending all my waking hours, working, and what I found the reality for me is that I was repeating what I grew up with. Oh, no. And I saw how that relationship ended, and made a resolve that I didn't want that relationship to end the same way.
Right.
And so, I ended up accepting a position. I was offered a position to take over a health science technology program for a high school, as well as and they said, you can keep maintaining your practice, we'll need you here a few hours a day to help run the program and, get it off the ground and do all those things. And so I was like, okay. So I did that. Then they found out that I played, a little bit of college ball, and they said, hey, do you want to coach too? And I'm like, yeah, I'd like to coach. And that was a blessing in itself, because, if anybody knows anything about Texas football, it is a huge deal here.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. And usually the course of events that you go through when you start coaching is they require you to start off at the middle school level, then you have to work your way up to the high school, then you work your way up to a varsity coach position. And I found myself in a position where I moved right into a varsity position. And so, I had to have a pretty steep learning curve. It helped that I had the experience of playing and being exposed to that, and, exposed to football at a high level. And so, I think that's probably what helped with that, that jump. But there was still a lot of learning that had to be done along the way too, to, make sure that I was up to the level. That's the thing, is most of your coaches in Texas, they have to have a high level. I remember when I left there and went to another school, my interview was 3 hours long. I started doing that, but it allowed me to be able to spend, direct one-on-one time with my kids. And, awesome. And so essentially what I did is I put my, main career on hold and changed gears and found a way to be able to be in a position so that I could be with my kids all the way through, at least until they graduated. And so I have coached every one of my kids. My oldest, he was a football kid, track, powerlifting. All my kids have done powerlifting. I've been a powerlifting coach for 15 years. I've coached on both the high school and on the national level. Starting with my second son, every one of our kids have been to state and competed at state. My youngest actually won state last year as a freshman, and so she's going back to defend her title this year. So. Okay. Yeah, and because that's one of the things where I'm at now. I left, found myself in a position where when we moved to the other school, was very happy. We're in a little bit smaller town. Wanted to kind of get away from the stress of being in the the Metroplex, the DFW Metroplex. And wanted to get out to a little bit smaller town. And so we moved outside and we were there for a few years, and then the athletic director had been there for 24 years, which is a long time for any athletic director to be in a spot in the state of Texas. And so he announced that he was retiring. Well, if anybody knows anything about athletic programs, when you announce that when the head guys announce that he's retiring, everybody's jobs are on the line at that point. Everybody kept telling me when this athletic director said he was going to resign, they said, you're going to be fine. At the time I had the largest powerlifting team in North Texas. I had 56 lifters on my powerlifting team between boys and girls.
Oh.
And I had one assistant coach that we had to manage that. And, we were very successful. The only time that we didn't go to state was my first year there, because I had to get in and develop the program. And
Sure.
And so I think I had 4 girls and I think 8 boys my first year. And by the time we got done, I had 56 lifters in the program.
Wow, that's growth.
Yeah, and very successful. With those kids, they worked really hard, and but I also had one of the most successful programs in the district. And so everybody kept saying, you're going to be fine. We doubt anything's going to happen to you. I was the first one to let go. I was very popular with the parents. I was very popular with the school board. And for all intents and purposes, I guess I was deemed a threat. So I was the first one to let go. And then 2 weeks later, my wife was the middle school principal's secretary. And he called her in and said, we found out your husband got let go. We don't want any surprises, so we're going to go ahead and let you go too. And,
no way.
Yeah. So within 2 weeks, we were both, informed that at the end of the school year, we would not have jobs. And so, yeah. And I say that, and I share that just because repeated incidents, both individually, my wife, experienced a lot of these things individually, but then, together as a couple, and as parents, we found ourselves in situations where the only thing that we could rely on was our faith. And we were, we'd have to pray through those situations and really take the time to just wait for the answer, even though a lot of times in those situations, you don't feel like you can wait for an answer.
Right.
And I remember I had put in for all kinds of coaching jobs and would come up as a finalist for the jobs, and just for whatever reason, just wasn't getting it. I did have several coaches that were contacting me because, I had a reputation as a powerlifting and strength and conditioning coach. Had coaches that of successful programs that had reached out to me and said, hey, I'd love to hire you, keep us in mind, but he said, I just don't have a teaching position that I can plug you into with it. Because unfortunately in Texas, most of the time you're not allowed to just coach, and you have to have a teaching position to go with it. And so none of those doors were opening. I was continuing to still work in chiropractic, so I still had that to fall on. And it was actually my second son that came back and said, Dad, he said, why don't you just go back to doing chiropractic full time? He said, I know you love coaching. I know you love working with the kids, but he said, I know you love doing that too. So why don't you go back to that? So looking around, found out that the university that I had gotten my doctorate degree from in Dallas had some openings. So I put in my application and thought it would be an ideal situation to be able to take my teaching background, combine it with my doctorate background and my field experience. And so they have clinics there on campus that they're full functioning clinics, and essentially you train interns when they're going through their last year of clinicals, teaching them, practice management and all those things. And so I went through, did the application and got a phone call the next morning, and then had a job by the next Tuesday.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so, and the starting pay for that ended up being more than what, my wife and I were getting paid together working in the school district. So that allowed her to be able to go back to school and get an additional degree that she wanted, and kind of work on her career a little bit, and allowed us to kind of change gears. And then out of that, I progressed to, I developed a sports program in the clinic for working with athletes down at Parker that they didn't have prior. And so I started a program in the clinic, and then that developed into ideas of developing some degree programs and things like that, where that whole thing is expanded now. They said, well, you've got the whole thing going there in the clinic. We want to put you back out into practice for yourself. And so they opened up a clinic that it was a neurology-based clinic. I work on the more sports management, sports rehab, physical chiropractic type stuff. During the whole course of that, I really kind of assumed that I would not be coaching anymore. Then when we had to move back closer to the Metroplex, moved to an area where I knew the coaches and I knew, some of the people there at the school. So we moved into that area, that district, and my daughter went in. They started powerlifting, and the head powerlifting coach looked at who was also the girls' athletic coordinator, and he's also the head girls' basketball coach. So he didn't have an assistant, and he was expected to coach a powerlifting program. The powerlifting program had been in existence 1 year up to that at that point, and so they'd had one season, and then a bunch of their seniors graduated out. So my older daughter, was a freshman and coming in to do powerlifting, and she had grown up around it. All my kids have grown up in the weight room and working the sidelines on a football field so that they could be right there next to me. And, he looked at the name, he said, does your dad happen to be the Coach McAlister that was, out west that had the big powerlifting team? And she said, yes, that was my dad. And he said, can I call him? And so he called me up and said, would you please come coach our girls powerlifting program? And so yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. So that allowed me to be able to continue, because at the time I had transitioned over and I was coaching more on a national level at that point. And it allowed me to be able to continue to work in the high schools and work with high school kids and be able to be an influence there. So I've continued to do that. And now my youngest is in high school, and I have 2.5 years left with her. And then after that, I anticipate on probably retiring from coaching altogether, but still looking for ways to be able to be an influence, to be able to help parents and teens and all those things, which led to when I started coaching and teaching, I found myself in a position. I had kids that would, because I was open about how I got started and the struggles that I had to overcome, being homeless as a teenager and trying to work through that, and the resiliency that I had to develop. And kids are kind of drawn to people that have had to go through some hardships, and because they perceive, whether they are actually going through hardships or not, they perceive being a teenager as a hardship. And found myself being able to be a mentor and a source for advice for kids to be able to come and talk to. Started happening, probably the biggest thing for me is that I wanted to give advice that if it were my children asking for the advice from somebody else, what would I want my children to be told? And so that's where my advice would come from. It would come from a faith-based perspective, but it would also gear towards, if these kids are asking me these kind of questions, there's probably some things that are not right at home as well. And what are some things that I could do to be able to maybe help that, communication process or whatever it was that was going on. And I had enough kids that were coming and talking to me that I started identifying kind of 10 essential areas that seem to be lacking in all of those situations, as far as home life or parents and the kids, or those types of things, and started kind of logging all these different stories and conversations and writing them down, and they started taking the shape of a story. Decided to start a book, and thought it would be best to channel all these conversations through one main character. So that's why I created one character out of the book, and continued to write this for about 2 years, and then just adding to it as I went, and got a very clear message to just put it on hold. And so for the next 8 years, we went through the process of analyzing our own home situation, because that was the thing too, is I looked at is, if these kids are coming to me and asking me these types of questions, what kind of questions are my kids asking, and who are they asking to?
Oh, yeah.
And what kind of answers are they getting if they are asking those questions? And so it allowed us to step back and really look at the structure of our household and the structure of our, how we're parenting, and taking a lot of the things that I started writing down and the advice that I was giving, make sure that we were really implementing those things.
Awesome.
And putting it into making sure that we put it into practice. Well, I got a very clear message about a little over a year ago to finish the book. And, it was kind of one of those things when something happens, it's not if it happens once, it's a coincidence. When it starts happening more than once, it's a pattern. And I had 3 different people from 3 different, areas that none of these people knew each other, that all told me that, I needed to write a book and start getting in front of people and speaking about this stuff. And like I said, when it happened, and it all happened in 1 week. I had 3 people all in a week tell me the same thing. And so I was like, okay. So I got the manuscript out that I had saved and started working on it. And within a week and a half, had the book finished.
Oh, wow.
And then I went through the process of trying to figure out how to get it published and do all those things, and ended up self-publishing. And since then, I've also developed a study guide to go with it, and have already been picked up for numerous speaking engagements already. Done a lot of podcasts, and I've been a radio show host or co-host for some of the stuff that I've written about, and it was slowly taken off. So
that's awesome. So your book is called Pillars of Powerful Parenting. Like you said, there are 10 pillars that you life. What exactly is powerful parenting? Why did you use that term?
I use that term because it's in all honesty, I didn't even originally come up with that term. I had a good friend of mine that named Mark Feinberg that was working with me to help with getting the book published. And the original working title for it is, do you know what your child told me today? And that was the original title of the book. And as we were continuing to work through it, and he actually suggested, he said, based off the stuff that you've got in there, he said, I would suggest, the Pillars of Powerful Parenting. He's the one that actually suggested the title. And so we kind of worked through why we use that terminology. The pillars themselves, we use that because, pillars are foundational. Those are the ones that help support the roof of a building. When you look at the ancient ruins, and most of the times when the roofs have collapsed and it's still standing, the pillars are still there. And so those are the foundational things. That's why we called them pillars. And the word powerful, it has intent behind it, to where there's a degree of control over what you're doing as far as a parenting, and so you're being intentional and you're controlling the way you're parenting as far as that intent is concerned. But you're also doing it with a specific outcome in mind. So that's why we use the term powerful. It's a form. It's also a word for influence. If you look at the definition of it, it's to be in a position of influence. And that's what we should be doing. We should be intentionally influencing our children with an end product in mind of what should that child look like? What do you want that child to look like when you're done? When you're done raising them. And that's always kind of a misnomer. When you're done raising them, the law says that they're raised when they're 18 and they're full-fledged adults. And when they leave home, you will find yourself, questioning, did I teach them everything? And there's still a lot of things that, that they still don't know by the time they leave your home. So.
Yeah, no, I question that in my mind because science tells us their brains aren't fully developed till their early 20s.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of crazy to me that an 18-year-old is a quote unquote adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the intention behind what you are writing about. I read a book that was called Intentional Parenting, and did the study guide with that too. And it's kind of similar. It's like, you need to make no matter what we think, we are the biggest influencers in our child's life. You know, even as teenagers, when they're not half paying attention to us and they're rebelling or whatever, we're still highly involved and influential in their lives, and we can be. So, you know, what are they seeing us do? What are we doing on purpose? So I don't want you to give your whole book away on this podcast, but I picked 3 pillars that I personally found kind of to be the most interesting to talk about. So the first one I really like, because one of my biggest values in life is love and unconditional love. So pillar 1 is unconditional love. Yeah. What are some examples of unconditional love?
So when I did that, I actually had somebody, I did a presentation I had somebody that got a copy of my book, read it, and had me come in and speak to a men's Bible study. And they wanted me to talk just on the first chapter. And so I did an entire presentation on just the first chapter. And, you know, the first question that I asked, you know, our entire group is, what transgressions, or how many transgressions are you allowed to where you no longer warrant being loved anymore? You know, can you exceed your number of transgressions? And if the answer is that there are no limits, then that would be unconditional. So, I mean, the term unconditional itself, I mean, it's you know, it means without, you know, there's not something that you can do to earn it. It's you know, there's no conditions attached to it to where you can only get my love if you do this, and this, you know. And when I was going through and doing my research for that particular topic, I narrowed it down to there were 7 traits that are related to unconditional. I don't know if you want me to go through all 7 today, but it means without restrictions, without limits. So with unconditional love, you know, it's infinite, which means it has no beginning, it has no end. You know, it involves making sacrifices, and again, all this is biblical principle behind it. And if you think about it as a parent, what sacrifices have we made? You know, I sacrificed, being in full-time practice for a number of years to be able to be with my kids and to be able to have that time and be able to bond with them. You know, so what sacrifice? I mean, we sacrifice financially, we sacrifice all these things. So, you know, being able to be willing to do that. You know, unconditional love is something that can't be earned. You know, you can't work for it. You know, and if you look at this, you know, from a biblical principle, this kind of how God operates with us. You know, you know, it you know, if we go back and look at, you know, Ephesians chapter 2, you know, it says, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith, not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not by works, but so that no one can boast. You know, right. It's not something that you can do to earn. It should already be there. And if you think about, you know, look at children, look at small children. They're born inherently loving their parents, and even to the worst parents. You know, I mean, you have children that are born to abusive parents, parents that are addicted to drugs and on all these different things, and their children still love them. And despite all those negative things that are coming at them, it's not until, you know, we grow older and we become more jaded and emotionally scarred and all these things that we start developing conditions on who we allow to be able to love us and be within our circle and all those things. And so, but that brings me to, you know, the next trait would be is it has to only be accepted. Love, all you have to do is accept unconditional love. You know, there's again, you're not having to earn it. There's no restrictions tied to it. And with unconditional love, it should never be lost. You know, if it's unconditional, you can't lose it. You know, if you go back to the story of the prodigal son that took his, right. we took his inheritance and squandered all of it and came back covered in pig slop and brought back home, and he came back home with open arms. Be surrendering your expectations, doing things without expectation of something in return. If you're going to do somebody for somebody with unconditional love, you don't expect anything back. You don't necessarily expect love back from them because you've given it to them without conditions. And the last one that is on there is it has forgiveness to it. People are going to mess up. People are going to make mistakes. As parents, we make mistakes. As children, they're going to make mistakes. What mistakes can your children make that you're still going to continue to forgive them and love them and allow them to know that?
Right.
When I was going through the situations with my parents, especially where our children were concerned, and we had some pretty heated exchanges that went back and forth, and I ended up getting an email from my mother that it was a pretty pointed email, involving all the decision behind, because they were basically told, look, if you can't treat all the children the same, then you don't need to be involved with them, because we don't want that chaos. We don't want that chaos in our household. Right. And so I got an email reply back that said, and that conversation happened verbally, and then I got an email reply back that said, you've exceeded your number of transgressions, and so we are cutting all ties with you. And,
wow.
And of course, there's a part of that snarky side of me that was, well, if I'd known I'd had a limited number of transgressions, I would have used them better. But that, and I've still got the email. I saved it, and I pull it out and pull it up and read it every once in a while, just to remind me. Because children are going to challenge you. Children are going to, when your children leave your home, they're going to do things that you don't agree with. And there should still be an expectation that that you love them anyway. And they need to know that you love them anyway. So, so that's kind of what led me down this road of what unconditional love was, is to get a better understanding of that. Parenting for me has been it was a challenge just because of the way that I grew up. I mean, I grew up, learning to be respectful. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. No, ma'am. You hold the door for a lady when she walks through the door. All the basic, things as far as respect is concerned, and especially being in a traditional Southern household. But it just stopped there. There was nothing else beyond that. And then as I got older, relationship was tied to something. Being able to be in a relationship was always tied to something where they were concerned. And unfortunately, sometimes for my dad, it was money. If there was money involved with it, that's the only time my dad would have anything to do with you. Be that way. I don't want, you shouldn't hold things over your kid's head. It's what I call leading by leverage. A true sign of leadership, whether you're leading in your household or leading a business or a volunteer group or whatever, you shouldn't have to, if you have to lead by leverage, either you've got the wrong people in place, or you're in the wrong position. And you really don't understand what leadership is. And so, you should be able to lead by influence instead of leverage. And that's another thing that, I look at this with unconditional love, is that you can't lead by influence if you don't have unconditional love for the people that you're expected to lead. And that applies to kids, and that everywhere I've gone. Right now the powerlifting team that I have, when I moved to this school and they asked me to take over the powerlifting program, I had 6 girls the first year. And we are now, we've made 3 trips to state at this point, and have 31 girls this season that I'm working with. So it's continued, but they also understand I'm hard on them, and I should be as a coach. I'm hard on them as far as guiding them and their expectations, but they also know that I care for each and every one of them, and I want what's best for every one of them. So and then as far as unconditional love is concerned, there are certain things that can be barriers to it. It's you can't focus on multiple relationships and expect one relationship to grow. It goes back to no one, if you go back to Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, no one can serve two masters, for it's either they will hate the one and love the other, or they will be devoted to one and despise the other. And so when you're looking at these relationships, you can't tie yourself, to two different things and expect them to grow equally. If all you do is you focus on your career and your job, then that's what you'll have, but then the other things are going to fail. Which is why I flipped my narrative, because I was devoted to my job and growing my career more than I was being a parent. And so I decided that I needed to focus more on being a parent and make enough that we were comfortable. Wasn't going to get rich by that method, but the most important, most valuable thing for me was at home, and I needed to take care of that first. So.
Yeah, so growing up for me, I did not feel unconditional love, even, in my 20s after I'd left home with my dad. It was, I had to make good grades to be loved, and I had to behave, and I had to be perfect to be loved. And with my mom, it was, I at home, she was very hurt, so she did things to purposefully hurt me. So I grew up not feeling unconditional love. What are some of the common examples that you've seen of conditional love?
Some of the things that you listed, that, I'm not going to love you if you're in a relationship with this person, which is a big problem in a lot of households, especially where teenagers are concerned. You can always have expectations. You should be able to have expectations. You want to teach your children to have a spirit of excellence in what they do and take pride in their work and have good grades. But your children should never doubt that you still love them, even though they may not be meeting the expectations that you want them to be able to have. But they should never doubt that you love them. And so, those are some of the conditional. If people tie conditions to that. Matter of fact, I just talked to a young lady the other day that, she's 23 years old, and she's still living at home. She finished her college degree last May, and she's got her first job, and she found out that her parents were taking her money. They had access to her bank account, and they were taking her paycheck and spending it.
Wow.
And then holding the relationship with them over her head at the same time. And I just told her, I said, I'm never an advocate for going against your parents. I said, but you do have to do some things to preserve yourself. I said, my advice would be is that you get a different bank account and you need to move out, and you need to do it on your own. And then hopefully her parents will learn, over the course of that, not to tie, financial means to, their relationship with their daughter. But I told her, I said, you're going to find out real quick where your parents' heart is in that. If you cut those things off, what's the relationship going to be like after that? So, and it's very unfortunate that, especially today, the family ties are very broken today compared to what they were when I was growing up. Even still with the rocky relationship I had with my parents, I still had my mom's side of the family was very tight knit, had a lot of uncles and aunts and cousins, and we had my grandfather and grandmother on my mom's side that were kind of the patriarch and matriarch of the family, and kind of held everything together. And it was interesting that when they both passed away, how fragmented the family very quickly became. Uh, and so, looking at that, to me, it tells me that everybody came together and said the things as far as love for family and family first and all those things. But as soon as the main influence wasn't there anymore, it just dissipated. And so I think it's extremely important that as parents, we need to teach our children as well that, just because we're not gone, we've said it to our kids multiple times. Look, you guys need to learn how to get along. You guys need to learn how to love each other, be there for each other, help each other out. Mom and I are not going to be here forever. And when we're not here, you've got to be able to continue to work on that relationship and continue to keep it close and teach your kids that. Your kids should be able to know who their cousins are and to be able to have that relationship, those bonds. And it's interesting to me how many families are not like that anymore. And not to say that there's not families out there that are close. There are. I've met some people that have very good, close-knit families, but it doesn't seem to be the majority anymore.
So. Right. So pillar 3 is communication. What are some of the most common types of communication?
So as far as communication, communication is verbal. Communication can be physical. You have nonverbal communication. And sometimes your nonverbal communication, I'm trying to remember what the statistics are, but I think it was like 75% of your communication is nonverbal. It's based off of language and body cues and physical presentation. So, and it kind of ties into one of my other chapters as well, as far as, the difference between affection and attention. If you're constantly sending your kids mixed cues, as far as, are you angry with them, or are you in a good mood, or being able to, and a lot of this overlaps into even our own personal relationships with our spouse and things like that. Sometimes that, if you don't take the time to understand why somebody's acting the way they are, is it directed directly at you because of you, or is it because there's something else that's going on, and then the behavior is a byproduct of it? I've always tried to teach our children, and my wife uses this phrase a lot. We heard it a number of years ago and have continued to use it, is that when something is going on or somebody is acting what would be considered out of the ordinary, seek first to understand. People act and behave in a way, and there's always a reason for it. People have mannerisms that they do, and there's always a reason for it. And as a matter of fact, my wife gets onto me all the time because she says, when I'm thinking, I have a very concentrated look, and of course I'm a bald-headed guy with a goatee, and I'm a pretty stocky guy on top of it. And so, everybody thinks I'm angry, and I'm like, no, I'm not angry, just thinking. But being able to take that time to really understand, and also teach your kids those body cues, those non-physical cues, and that also means having an open line of communication. Your children should be able to come and ask you, hey, are you okay? Or, hey, what's going on? And because that's a form of care in itself. And if you don't allow your children to do that, if everything is standoffish and they're not allowed to approach you, how's that relationship ever going to continue to grow? Because you're constantly communicating to them that, you're off limits. And then even still with the small part of verbal communication, how you talk to somebody and the tone. There should always be a very clear distinction. And not to say that you can't get onto your kids. You have to get onto your kids at times, but it shouldn't sound like everything else you say. That was when I went in the military, the very first squad leader that I had, he always had a different approach with us. All the other, you associate military, everybody's yelling at each other all the time.
Yes.
Everybody's talking to each other in the 10th octave, and it's really not like that, but that's kind of the perspective. But And you do have some, people that are in leadership positions that's how they address everybody. Is they want to address everybody down all the time, and everything's a yelling match. And my first squad leader wasn't like that. He would always talk just very calm. The only time he ever raised his voice is if you were in serious trouble, or if there was something going on and he needed to get your attention. And I asked him why. I said, why do you treat us differently than the other squad leaders and the platoon sergeants and all those things? He said I learned this from my first squad leader, and he said, and I've used it. And so and I've continued to use it through everything that I've done. He said, if all I do is ever yell at you, he said, if all I ever do is talk to you in an elevated voice, he said, when I really need you to hear something important, you're not going to hear it because it sounds like everything else I say. He said, you're going to tune me out. He said, and it gets to the point where you're going to tune everything I say out. And he said, so I have to make a distinction in how I talk to you so that you understand the differences between when, there's really a problem versus, there's not a problem. And I've carried that. I've always led that way after that point. I've coached that way. Even when I was coaching football, I didn't yell at my players. The only time you could ever hear me raise my voice is when we're down on the field, during a game, and I'm having to yell so that they can hear me across the field. But and I would always rotate my players out. But sometimes you would have to rotate a player out because they screwed up really bad, and you need to get them off the field. And it's funny because they would come off the field and they would look at me as they're coming off the field, and they knew whether they were in trouble or not by whether if I just kept staring at them when they came off the field, they knew they were in trouble. And so they would come off the field, and they would eventually circle back around behind me and so that I could talk to them. And but the other one would be, I'd look at them and say, good job. And they just knew I was rotating them out. And that was just kind of my way of being able to communicate with them in that manner if they knew they screwed up or not, because a lot of times they didn't know that they had messed up. But even still, when they came back around, I would turn around and I would get right up next to the ear hole, and I would talk just loud enough to where he could hear me. And because it wasn't necessary for everybody else to hear about his mistake. It was his mistake. And then I said, do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, sir. Okay. All right. And then that was it. It's dead in the water. It doesn't keep going on. It doesn't keep getting brought up. You don't keep, when your kids make mistakes, you don't just keep bringing it up over and over and over again. At some point, they've got to be able to know that it's, that the issue is dead, and they're not going to have to keep reliving that and be beat down with it every time, something like that comes up. So.
Yeah, that's one problem I had with my parents, that, 15, 20 years after I had done something, they were still, guilt tripping me and beating me over the head with it and telling everybody that they come in contact with about it. And it was really hard. And I think what your first squad leader said was really deep and very intuitive. And I feel that way about the word no. If we're constantly saying no, no, no to everything, when we're telling our child no because they're about to burn their hand or run into oncoming traffic, they're just going to tune us out.
Yeah.
So I try to be careful how often I say no and save it for when it really needs to be said too. But yeah. I love the tone of voice thing too.
Yeah. And it's also too, where our kids are concerned, teachable moments. You should not ever, at least this has always been the policy in our household. Our kids don't get told they can or can't do something because I said so. And to the extent that now, if I hear an adult say that to another adult, I actually heard it recently. Had somebody that came in and took over a new position, supposed to be the new, kind of the new business manager, office manager for a clinic. And heard that particular person tell one of the other doctors in the clinic that the doctor asked her, said, why did you need to know that? And based on a question, and that person came right back and said, well, first of all, because I said so. And so it was like, yeah, that's poor. That's not leadership at all. That's just poor management. Right. What that is. And so, that's not effective. And if it means that she heard that a lot growing up, and she's never had anybody of influence over her to be able to teach her that, that's not the way way you handle things either. So we've always looked for teachable moments. If we're going to tell someone, tell them no, we tell them why. Tell them why.
Absolutely. No. Absolutely.
And then if they still want to continue to do it, depending on what it is, sometimes, if they insist on learning their lesson the hard way, sometimes you got to love them enough to allow that to happen too.
Right. Right.
If you keep telling them no and they're keep insisting on doing it, well, okay. I mean, I'm not saying let your kid run out in traffic, but for little minor things, but eventually they start, they learn that, okay, when they say no, there's a reason for it, and the rule is not just to make my life miserable. But it's even more so with teenagers. When you're dealing with teenagers, they know, the rules that you've taught them growing up. They know, what the expectations are, but they start developing that sense of independence. They're wanting to develop that sense of independence. And it's even more critical, I think, at that point to really explain why you have certain rules in place, why, and look for teachable moments. And I can tell you, their friends will provide them with all kinds of teachable moments for you, so that they can see what the outcomes are going to be for certain situations. And sometimes you have kids that they just want to learn it themselves. They want to get out and experience those things and make those mistakes themselves. And so we've always tried to teach our kids, keep your mistakes small. Shooting and of course being in the military, and then we hunt and all those things. My kids wanted to be able to hunt. So, I started teaching them how to shoot at an earlier age and have a respect for, firearms and all those things. When I would teach them, I would tell them aim small, miss small. And then as they got a little older, I told them, I said, remember when I was teaching you how to shoot, aim small, miss small? And they were like, yeah. And I said, you need to do the same thing where your mistakes are concerned. I expect you're going to make mistakes. You're going to screw up, but keep your mistakes small. Don't make a decision or make a mistake that's going to be life-changing. And sometimes from their perspective, it's hard to see what would be a life-changing versus not a life-changing incident. But the goal is to try to use as many teachable moments as you can, because by the time, as they get closer to 18 or getting ready to graduate from high school and do all those things, you're going to realize quick all the things that you didn't have time to teach them. And it's just almost impossible to teach, I mean, I'm almost 50 years old, so it's hard to push 50 years of experience into somebody within 18 years and have them be able to step out with the knowledge and wisdom that you want them to. Right. And I have to remind myself, I have to go back and look at the mistakes that I've made, and some of the dumb stuff that I did when I was younger, and and just realize that they're going to do some of the same things whether we want them to or not, but how you handle it and how you address it is most important.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last pillar I wanted to chat about is pillar 6, which is consistency. Yeah. So what type of consistency or types of consistency does a child need? What do you mean by that?
So we talk about consistency. Consistency would be, it could be a number of things, but it could be enforcing the rules. When you have rules that are established, I always encourage every family that I talk to and that I work with to establish a set of core values. What is your family set of core values? And when you establish those core values, that should be the groundwork for all your decision making where your household is concerned. But you've also have to be consistent in working with those core values as far as the decisions that are being made, consistent in how you enforce discipline. If if all going back to talking about saying no. Okay, well, if you continue to just say no and you keep drawing a line in the sand and telling them not to cross, and they keep doing it, what are you actually teaching them? You're not really teaching them anything other than you can just say no and nothing's going to happen. There have to be consequences, but you have to be consistent in what those consequences are, as far as enforcement of the rules. And there was a study. There's been a couple different studies that I've seen come out. One of them said by the age of 5, another one said by the age of 7. But I said, if you don't have discipline established and respect of authority established by the time they're age 5, and one of the other studies said 7, then they will have a lifelong struggle with authority and discipline. And so, but in order to be able to get that in place, you have to have consequences, whatever consequences are consistent in your family, or what's good for your household. But you have to be consistent in enforcing those. Consistent in who you are. I mean, people tend to become a little lazy when they're tired, as far as their kids are concerned, and parenting and dealing with issues. I mean, I can tell you, after I've gone and worked in the clinic all day or back when I was teaching and coaching, worked long hours and then have to come home and deal with an issue. It can be real easy to just say, what, I really don't feel like dealing with that, and just dismiss it. And so then your kids are left with, well, I guess I got away with that, so I'll continue to do more stuff and get away with it. And you have to be consistent with addressing the issues. It's not about how you feel. It's not about how tired you are. If it comes down to a timing issue, then you say, okay, we're not going to deal with this right now, but we are going to deal with this, in a little while. Kind of goes back to what you tell your kid: wait till you get home, and then you deal with it then. But you still have to follow through. Consistency and follow through. If you tell your children you're going to do something, you got to follow through and do it, whether it's good or bad. If you tell your child that you're going to do something for them, if they do this, if you're going to tie a condition to something, for them to get a reward, you need to follow through and give them the reward. Don't tell them that you're going to do it just to get them to do it, and then renege on it and not follow through. Right. So, but it's the same thing with discipline as well. If you tell them that you're going to do something, then you got to follow through and do what you said you were going to do. So.
And just here, I just want to add something really quickly. I know that you know this, but sometimes we think that kids want to be able to do whatever they want, and they don't actually want to be disciplined. But I had a friend, and she had a 17-year-old son, and she literally let him do anything he wanted to do. He got the master bedroom, he got the better vehicle, he could stay out and do whatever he wanted, come home whenever he wanted, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
And one time I was at their house when they had a fight, and he was telling her, you just need to be a mom. You're not acting like a mom, you're acting more like a friend. I need you to be my mom right now. I mean, he was begging for some sort of boundaries or discipline or something.
Yeah. So
kids really do need it. It makes them feel safe because they know what their boundaries are and what's going to happen if they cross them. So we definitely, I totally agree. And with chronic pain and chronic illness, it's definitely a barrier to being consistent, because there are a lot of times I'm just like, I can't deal with this right now. I don't really care what you do, even though I really do care. So that's definitely something that I need to work on, or find a better strategy, because most of my listeners have chronic pain, chronic illness. So I know that they're struggling with the same things.
Yeah.
So where can we get more information about you, what you do, about your book?
So I have a website. It's just drdavismcalister.com.
Okay.
I have links on there to some of the other appearances that I've done. So if people want to hear me, I also do speaking on some success principles. I also do speaking on health-related topics and those things. Matter of fact, I'm scheduled in March. I do a lecture on knee protocols for prehab for knee issues. And so I'm going to be speaking at the NFL Combine in March. So a variety of different topics on there that people can go on and listen to. There's links to my books that are out on Amazon. They can click on that link. It'll take them to the Amazon link. Or they can just go on Amazon. If they just type my name in under books, the books will pop up. If people go on though, and you can create an account on my page, there's a free sample of the first chapter of my book that you can only access though once you create an account. So
great.
That if they want, so kind of a freebie for people if they want to do that. But there was information on there. I've got right now I'm working on putting together a coaching group, people that want to come together and kind of as a 10-week program. And so what I do is I do it for individuals, but I'm working on trying to develop a group system as well, where we get on like this. We have a Zoom call once a week, and everybody gets a copy of the study guide and the book, and we go through each week and we work through each one of the pillars over the course of a 10-week program, and continue to work with them and develop and allow them to be able to answer questions. And also I like that group format with that. I haven't assigned a start date. I'm trying to get enough people together to be able to assign a start date for the next one. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And that is McAlister with one L, correct?
Yeah, one C, one A, one L. Yeah, people like to add letters to my name. People like to change my first name too. They try to change it to David all the time, and it's Davis with an S. So, yep.
Awesome. Yeah. So make sure you're searching the right person in Amazon.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on. This has been really informative and interesting.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.